In this video, I'm going to show you how to use auto layout in Figma and level up your fundamentals by creating this dynamic login pattern. So auto layout was introduced a few years ago and it helps you structure your content. It will dynamically resize your elements, and a lot of designers, even senior designers I know, don't actually make use of this feature. I think it's a really important fundamental, and if you can master it, it'll really set you apart from everyone else who have yet to understand it. So I'm going to dive into Figma now, and I'll attach the practice file in the description below. But auto layout is actually very simple. On the left, you can see I've created a few local library content. So we've got some local styles and some local components. And if you scroll back to the right, this is where we'll do the auto layout exercise. To apply auto layout is actually really simple. So select all the elements you want to be structured together, and you either press Shift A or you go over to the right hand panel and click on the plus icon next to auto layout. Then let's add a fill background to it just so we can see a little bit better. And on the surface, it probably doesn't look like anything has changed. First thing we need to adjust is the horizontal resizing of the internal elements. So what does that mean? So if you zoom into the auto layout frame you've just created and you click on login or forgotten login details, you can see that the width of these two elements, they don't actually fill the whole width of the auto layout frame. And also on the right hand panel where we adjust the X, Y and width and height, you'll see that two new functions have appeared. And if you scroll across to the left here, you can see what it would look like if you just simply applied a frame to it that hasn't got auto layout enabled. So the horizontal and vertical resizing are missing. So in general, any elements you want to adjust dynamically in size, you want to set that to fill container. Otherwise, hug container will wrap itself around the content that is inside, and fixed will be just fixed width all the time. So for example, the CTA button down here, we probably want it to be hug, because when the login pattern gets wider or narrower, we don't really want it to adjust itself in size, whereas everything else on the page, you want it to be fill container. So if I select everything, go to the right hand side, on the horizontal resize, click on fill container. Once you apply fill container to all of them, what you notice is the whole frame has just shrunk down in size, and that's because no external sizing has been defined. So it went to the smallest width that it could find, which is the button. And if we now drag the auto layout frame out, you'll see that the username and the password form field adjust in size, and also the forgotten login details link below. So for vertical resizing, because content should just push itself down the page anyway, you should almost always leave it at hug content, but there might be certain situations where you want to change that. So just apply the same concept we did with the horizontal resizing. Okay, so now we can start adjusting the spacing of the top, bottom, left, right, and also the content in between. If we go back down to the auto layout panel, you'll see that there are three text fields where you can enter numbers. So one is set at 24, one is set at 0, one is set at 0. So if I increase these to, let's say 20, you'll notice that the auto layout frame has pushed the content in by 20 pixel. And on the vertical as well, if we change it to 20, again, the content has adjusted itself so that it's got 20 pixel spacing at the top and at the bottom. And on the one above where it says vertical gap between items, again, we can adjust this to whatever value we want it to be. So this defines the spacing in between all the different elements within the auto layout frame. And hopefully Figma will add individual spacing between the elements as well in a later patch, because right now they all have to be the same spacing. Now at the top, there are a few directional buttons, and right now it's set to vertical layout. So if we change that to horizontal, you can see it looks a little bit off, but it is doing exactly what we're telling it to do. So if we were to stretch it out a little bit, you can see that all of the elements inside the auto layout frame are stacking horizontally. So let me change that back to vertical and reduce the size down. And then there's one more function that's called wrap layout. So if we go down to the icon sets below, this will illustrate the wrap feature a little bit better. So right now you can see it's set at horizontal layout. And if I was to change the width of the icon sets, nothing happens. But if I change it to wrap layout and I reduce this width, all of the content are pushed down to the next line. So this is really useful for things like a responsive table, or if you've got a collection of card items you want to display in maybe an e-commerce store where you want to list a whole load of product tiles. And to the right of the layout, we've got the alignment feature. And if I give a little bit more space on the y-axis for the icon sets, we can illustrate the alignment feature better. So if I change it to center, you can see the content is now center align and right align. And then by clicking on bottom align, you can see the content adjusting itself to the position according to where we've defined it. So some of you might have noticed the username and the password are actually local components already, and they've got auto layout applied to them. So if we were to drill down into the type box itself rather than the form field, we can now go into auto layout's advanced settings and play around with the strokes feature. So right now it is set to excluding. So you can see the height is at 48 pixel. If we were to change that to including, you'll see it's increased to 50 pixels because it's including the border pixel into the element in itself. And it's worth noting that if the border has been set to center, then it'll only include half of the pixel width. So now because the pixel width is at 1 pixel, it's only included half of that at the top and at the bottom. So it's increased the height by 1 pixel. And if it's set to outside, then it doesn't include it at all. So I'm going to revert back to what it was previously. Next, we're going to look at canvas stacking. So canvas stacking is really useful when you've got things like drop down, where you don't necessarily want to push the content below down when something expands. So these components, I've actually already added a variant into them so that they can be a drop down. By default, Figma's auto layout canvas stacking is last on top. So if I open this drop down, you can see everything underneath is actually appearing above it from a Z-axis perspective. And this doesn't really make sense in Figma because everything else works in the opposite directions. So if you look at the layers panel, whatever is on top will always appear above the layer below from a Z-axis perspective, but for some reason they've made it so that in auto layout the default is last on top. It's just something that you got to bear in mind when you're using auto layout. And if we change that to first on top, then you can see the content is actually sitting in the correct position. And if I change the password to a drop down as well and I open it up, again it's appearing in front of whatever is below it. And then lastly, for align baseline, it's really more applicable to text elements only. I've got 2 text elements here, so they are slightly different in size, but what I can do here, so I've already got auto layout applied. If I was to go into advanced setting and change it to align text baseline, what it would do is it would make sure the baseline of the text is all aligned with each other. So this is particularly useful when you've got 2 different font styles and you want them to appear on the same line. And there you have it. That's all your fundamentals for auto layout. Now you can go away and spend time playing around with it. You can stack auto layout within auto layout. And as I mentioned earlier, right now you have to have the same spacing for all the elements within an auto layout frame. So what you can do is create an auto layout within an auto layout. So then that is defining the individual spacing in between them. And you can also make your own local and global components with auto layout enabled as well. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below. And if there are any terminologies you didn't understand, you can learn about them in this video here.